Have you ever felt like the world is a never-ending hellscape of suffering and meaninglessness? Well, if you answered yes, 17th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer would say that you are exactly right. Just like you, he believed that suffering was an essential part of existence, not just rooted in human nature, but in the nature of reality itself. Now, you might think that the world is a terrible place out of just a general sense of despair at the state of the world, but Schopenhauer was not your average edgelord. He was actually the best edgelord, and he was so good that he convinced the hoity-toity academic philosophers of his time to seriously consider the idea that the world could be as horrific as every one of us angsty teenagers knows it to be. Anyways, today I will explain to you just how he did that and why that was actually a meaningful contribution to Western philosophical discourse. Schopenhauer's pessimism stemmed from his theory of how reality works, or in other words, his metaphysics. Schopenhauer thought that the world that we interact with on a day-to-day basis is very different to the real world. One analogy is that he thought of the world as a computer software. The user interacts with what shows up on screen, but what actually makes the software work is the code, which the user can't access. Schopenhauer thought that the world was the same way. The world that we interact with on a day-to-day basis is the stuff on the screen. It's an output and expression of the code of the world. And he called this code of the world itself the will. Now at this point you might think, what the hell is even that? The world is the world, why should we believe in anything that we can't observe? And if you're interested in that, leave me a comment and I'll make a video about Immanuel Kant's transcendental idealism and go into a little bit more depth about that idea. Anyways, and carrying on, Schopenhauer thought that the will was a force similar to motivation. He thought that the will was constantly striving, and he said that the way that the will expresses itself is through the instincts, desires, and actions of things in the real world. And by thing, I literally mean anything in the world. It could be a person, a leaf, or a rock, that sort of thing. Here's where it gets really bad and angsty. Schopenhauer thought that the striving of the will manifested itself in living things as a will to survive and reproduce. And in a world of limited resources, this leads things to constantly compete and fight with one another. So living things end up getting caught in a never-ending cycle of fighting and reproduction and struggle to survive. And since the world is just the will, an unchangeable force, and the expressions of the will, nothing can ever change. The world is constantly full of suffering, leading to never-ending pain and suffering. Schopenhauer thought that the world was a living, breathing hell. For him, suffering is inherent to existence. Quite lovely, isn't it? At this point, if you feel somewhat compelled by Schopenhauer's pessimism, let me just give you a little bit more context of who this man was before you start spiraling. Schopenhauer was an incel. He had no friends or social life, and he was a music nerd, but not in the cool way. He is known for having written that he thought that vocal tenors give vegetable energy and basses give mineral energy. And no, I don't know what that means. Nobody knows what that means, but it's there. As you get to know Schopenhauer more, you'll realize that he was actually a genius, but he was also clinically insane by modern standards, so I wouldn't take his ideas too seriously. That being said, modern philosophers still love to study him. And you might wonder why Schopenhauer was so important to philosophy. There are a lot of reasons for this, but the main reason is that he was the first Western philosopher to write about suffering in a way that actually convinced the other philosophers to consider the sheer magnitude and depths of suffering that exists in the world. And this was actually super revolutionary at the time because the idea that needless suffering and justice were incredibly pervasive in the world at the time wasn't super widespread or commonly accepted. Up until Schopenhauer, no one had gotten Western philosophers to confront the reality of the amount of suffering in the world so directly. So even though the works of Schopenhauer aren't super relevant today, they were completely revolutionary during the times that they were published, and it changed the course of Western history, culture, and philosophy. One example of this impact is his influence on Dostoevsky's books, which continue to be popular today. Schopenhauer's philosophy is a brilliant example of innovation in philosophy and gives us insight into how to conduct exciting and inventive philosophy in the contemporary world.